You're listening to Transformational Thinkers with Sara Sheehan, the global podcast where growth-minded CEOs and executive leaders get real-world strategies on business transformation, talent development, and mastering change management. Each episode brings actionable lessons, candid conversations with C-level innovators, and human capital strategies from around the world. If you're ready to scale, optimize your organization, and lead breakthrough change, you're in the right place. Let's unlock enterprise growth and success together. Hey there! On today's episode of Transformational Thinkers, I'm sitting down with Daniel Shulman to get real about the nitty-gritty of corporate patents and innovation, where the legal world meets game-changing ideas. If you've ever wondered how to actually protect the best work your team creates, or what it takes to build a culture that truly values innovation, this is one you don't want to miss. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Daniel. I'm so glad that you're here.
I am so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You are so welcome. I'm very excited to have this robust conversation, and I know it's going to be interesting. So, Daniel, many organizations talk about wanting innovation. In your experience, what are the overlooked first steps that enterprise leaders must take to actually make space for innovation to thrive rather than letting it just be a buzzword?
So innovation isn't a buzzword unless your innovators innovate. One of the things that I frequently tell people, and you think it should be obvious, but you have to start here, is that the great culture of innovation has to start from empowering your innovators to innovate. They have to have reward, recognition. They have to feel good about what they're doing so that they feel invested in innovating. And so there's a lot of ways, just from the bottom up to do that. Number one, you should be interested in innovation, train on innovation, talk about innovation, and don't talk about it in a way that minimizes what the people who are really not at the C-suite, not in middle management, but the people, your day-to-day workers, is where the innovation comes from. And if you're not empowering those people to innovate, if you're standing in the way, if you're saying, and you don't stand in the way deliberately, you might say something like, I don't have a customer for that. And an innovator will say, of course you don't have a customer for it. We haven't invented it yet. Right? Or that's too expensive. We need to focus on, we're just doing cost savings this quarter. Great. And then next quarter, when all the cost savings are done, what's in your pipeline?
Great follow-up.
So there are just ways that executives tend to minimize innovation. The other thing that happens, and it's one of the hidden ways that people lose the morale of innovation. Bad agreements with their partners, bad agreements with their customers. Anytime you have an agreement with a customer where your customer walks away owning the innovation, your innovators say, why do I work here instead of working for my customer? All of my good work doesn't stay in the company.
Right.
When your customer, if you're in the consumer packaged goods world and you walk down the aisle at your Walmart, your Target, your grocery store, wherever, and you see your innovation on the shelf for another company, your innovators go, why do I work here?
Right.
What was the point? Right. And so just controlling your innovation reinforces all of the things that you want your innovators to be thinking about to feel good about doing it.
That is a really great thing to cap off with, because if they feel good about innovating, that's something they're going to lean into continually.
It is. And it doesn't have to be monetary. I mean, it's great if it is. If you want to reward people for innovation, for patent filings, for trade secret filings, for developing innovations and submitting them, and you want to give them an incentive program, which a lot of companies do, that's great. Fully supportive of that. But I'll tell you one of the things I learned when I was in-house as a chief IP counsel at a big company, focusing on the innovation, was that I had to get out of my office and go talk to the innovators. I spent so much time talking to the C-suite and management because that's what the lawyers do. But the most rewarding part of my job was walking around the office, going to visit other plants, other product development centers where executives didn't often go.
Right.
And poking my head into people's offices and say, what are you working on? The reason why that's important for the lawyers to do, so if you're a chief IP counsel, right, or if you're just a general counsel that you care about innovation, the reason why that's so important to do is because so many employees equate the legal department with management because they think the lawyers also have the power to say no. So if you have the power to say no, you're in a position where somebody thinks of you as a leader in the company, is almost sort of directing the company activities. We don't do anything without the lawyers say so, right? That's largely a fiction, but for a lot of employees, that's how they think about the lawyer. So when the lawyer comes to your office and says, I care about what you're doing, what are you working on? Like, there's a feeling that management cares about me. Just poking your head into your innovators' offices every once in a while goes a long way to creating a culture of innovation.
And showing that you care always works.
Always.
Because it absolutely makes a difference. Most CEOs view IP as a defensive tool. How should business leaders shift their approach to using intellectual property as an engine for new solutions and business growth in a rapidly changing marketplace?
So it starts fundamentally with understanding the interplay between innovation and intellectual property. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you ask yourself, or you ask any company that you deal with, do you do the exact same thing as your competitor exactly the same way? The answer had better be no, because if the answer is yes, then I'm not sure why you're in business. Okay. So that means you necessarily do something different. That means you have innovation. Mm-hmm. Now the question is, do you know what that innovation is? Do you know where it is? And most importantly, from an intellectual property perspective, do you know how you're making that exclusive to you? Because that's the difference between intellectual property and innovation. Innovation is the thing. The difference, intellectual property is the tool that makes it exclusive. If your innovation is not exclusive to you, you can't charge a higher price for it because your competitors will just do it. And you can't gain market share because you have nothing unique to offer. So your CEO, your management, the people who are running the business should think about intellectual property as the tool that protects their competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. And the minute they admit that they've got a competitive advantage, no matter where it is, doesn't have to be a widget, doesn't have to be a product, it could be a service. And even if you're not making anything, so it's not your manufacturing methods, it could be that your best service is customer service. And you do that well, and you do that better than anybody. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. Can you systematize that? Can you repeat it if you open a new office and hire more people? Can you make sure that your people are trained on it? If you have secret ways of sorting your customers and dealing with your customers and providing great results, are you sure that your employees aren't leaving and taking that somewhere else when they leave? Because inevitably employees leave. So the way that they answer that question, Sarah, is they think about what makes us different. What differences do we have that drives our profitability? And then let's focus on making sure that that's exclusive. Mm-hmm. And let's call an intellectual property lawyer and find out the right way to do that.
Mm-hmm. And on your point about customer service, I spoke to a gentleman just a few days ago who was in a commodity business. Mm-hmm. But he had the highest customer service ratings in the world. Can be a defining factor in your business.
That's why I'm careful to say, ask a company, not only do you do the exact same thing as your competitor, but do you do it in exactly the same way? Mm-hmm. Because there are so many companies that do the exact same thing, right? Every accountant, every law firm, every mortgage broker, every real estate agent, they do the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But
absolutely.
But there has to be a reason why I hire you and not the other mortgage broker. Why I hire you and not the other accountant. Right?
Because I know that you will do the best job for me and I trust you.
Yeah, there's something about the way you do your job that gives you a competitive advantage that makes somebody, maybe not everybody, but it makes your customers want to work with you. And if your competitors could do the same thing, what happens to your advantage, right? And what happens to your business?
It would diminish my business, clearly.
Of course it would.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Daniel, what specific behavior changes from both senior leadership and staff are essential to create a self-sustaining culture of innovation that delivers tangible intellectual property?
So we talked about it a little bit in some of the things that you do, and they're innumerable things to just encourage the innovators to innovate and empower them. They can feel good about innovating. So again, it's talking to innovators. If you're in management, don't stay in the ivory tower. Talk to people, find out what the innovators are doing. If you're in middle management, find out what your people who report to you are doing for innovations. That's number one. Number two, train people on innovation, right? One of the reasons innovation gets lost is because people don't know what it is when it happens.
Or they don't think about how unique something is.
Exactly. So they can't spot it because they haven't been trained on what innovation looks like. So here's, an example that I used in my own company when I was in-house, and we manufactured things across dozens and dozens of manufacturing plants all across the country, if not the world. And let's say you're manufacturing something and you're manufacturing that in maybe 2 different factories.
Right.
And in each factory, you've got 3 or 4 manufacturing lines. But in each factory, there's one person whose job it is to come in every day and pull the levers and turn the knobs to make sure that that one machine that they're watching for that 1 8 or 10 hour shift is running perfectly. And if that person doesn't recognize it, every time that person improves the machine or just keeps it running longer, better, faster than it would otherwise do, that they're innovating, your innovation is lost. Because what happens? Well, one, you might have other machines in that very plant that aren't working because that person hasn't told anybody. You have the other manufacturing plants that are running the same lines that don't realize that somebody else is running their line better. And as a company, that means that your baseline productivity is lower than it could be. And in fact, in each of those other manufacturing locations, you have people who are doing the same thing. So if they had all talked, if they had all understood what innovation was, just from the day-to-day job that they do, their baseline manufacturing would go from here all the way up to here. Because everybody would be operating off of everybody else's best practices. Now, if you don't train people that that's what innovation looks like, now think about the effect that that has on your bottom line.
Right. Collaboration, communication, having efficient ways of working. All those things make a huge difference.
All of those things. And you have to know when you've done it. Because if you don't know that you have something worth communicating, all your great communication lines in the world won't help you.
Right.
Somebody, the light bulb, figuratively goes off, but they're kind of like they're wearing dark sunglasses. They didn't see the light bulb go off.
Right.
They didn't know that it went off.
I do think there are people that think intellectual property is only for software code or, let's say, a new compound that someone develops in a lab that could become a medicine. I think they have very limited purview of what they think it is.
It's the biggest misconception I deal with, frankly, is that, one, people mistake intellectual property for innovation. Because again, intellectual property is just a tool that makes it exclusive. So that's why I like to focus people on, you must have innovation if you're in business. You absolutely must. And the job of the intellectual property lawyer is to find out what's the best way to make sure that you keep that exclusive so that you have something that nobody else have, and you keep it that way, right? I mean, innovation makes you different, but it only makes you different as long as you stay different. Intellectual property is the tool that lets you stay different.
That's beautifully said. Daniel, your work spans law, business, technology, and education. How does drawing from multiple disciplines help organizations generate breakthrough ideas? And what practices can CEOs adopt to encourage multidisciplinary collaboration?
So one, keep getting back to training and getting out of your office and talking to the different innovators, because they are all over your company, right? So innovation doesn't just come from one place. So there are things you can do internally as a company, like it's like the literal suggestion box. Innovation can come from anywhere, right? And you recognize these people. You recognize those people at quarterly town hall meetings or so forth, right? Somebody figures out that way to make the manufacturing line run more efficiently, and somebody nominates them for some sort of recognition. Great. You can do stuff like that costs you nothing but 5 minutes at a quarterly town hall where you talk to the company about all the great things that you've done, right? You train people and train people all over the workforce so you know where the innovation is coming from. You have your eyes open to what other people are doing, where the customer demand is coming from. And sometimes innovation means finding the right partner to bridge a gap where you don't have it and being open to those things. But if you do that, I come back to one of the earlier points I made, which was you can't let your innovation walk out the door with every partnership. So you need to be thinking about very, very strategically about, okay, if I'm going to partner with somebody to help bridge a technological gap that I don't have, because sometimes that's necessary, right? You can build or you can buy. And sometimes buying is more efficient. But you really need to think very carefully about how am I going to do joint development so I don't give away intellectual property, so that at the end of the day, whatever me and my partner develop together, there's clear run rules about who gets to use that in what field, to make sure that they're not competing against each other, that they're not then taking the joint innovation and selling it to a competitor of mine.
Right.
So there's a lot of innovation comes from all over the place. And I think if you're open-minded and receptive to it and learn what it looks like, you'll grab all of those innovations. You'll find a lot more of them than you otherwise would.
That's a wonderful thing to help people think creatively about where they might find new sources of intellectual property that could become a great solution.
Yeah. The other two things that I would suggest companies think about from time to time is doing innovation mining. So innovation mining could be a relatively complicated, time-consuming process. But what you're doing is kind of one of two things. Either, you've got all these innovators and they've all innovated, but they haven't told everybody what their innovations are because it's not on the product roadmap and they know it would be rejected and it's a waste of time. And so that's kind of like where the, high risk home run innovations are, because they're high risk. Nobody wants to set aside time to develop something from scratch, right? Companies are looking for a lot of singles and doubles and, product improvements because of those are quicker to market. They're better ROI, but you'll miss the paradigm shifting innovations if you don't make time for those.
And when you say innovation mining, are you talking about, like, for instance, a structured program that legal counsel would then engage in across all functions to understand what's new?
Absolutely. I mean, so there's a whole process that could go into it, including doing all the prep work to figure out, let's say you're doing an innovation mining session just to prioritize the stuff that have been in your innovator's back pockets that you wouldn't otherwise hear about, which is, again, a great way to motivate people, to let them know that you are interested about the things in the back pockets that they would otherwise just stick there and never tell anybody about. So you do this once a year, every, periodically. So it's important when you do that, because it is pretty structured. You want to set up criteria for innovations to pursue, and you want to be faithful to those, right? So there's a lot of interviewing going on, talking to people about how do we determine which of the innovations we're going to prioritize. But then, yes, you get the people in the room, you start disclosing innovations. It's a whole day thing usually, and you have people. You break up into groups. You think about what people proposed. You brainstorm about them, and then you rate them according to the criteria, and then you decide what are we going to do going forward, and let's pick 2 or 3. Let's get the lawyers involved to clear them. Let's figure out if we're going to file any patents. Let's figure out what's worth investing in. And that's just to find out what was in people's back pockets, and those are where some of the home runs can come from.
I really like that idea, the formal innovation mining opportunity. That's really good.
I helped a lot of clients over the pandemic do that, because what ended up happening was, you had all these innovators that would normally be in a prototyping lab and they couldn't go to work for like a year. Right? So they couldn't go to work. They couldn't make prototypes. They couldn't test anything. So literally all they did is sit home with their lab notebooks thinking of stuff. And I said, well, we're all online. Why don't we do an online invention mining session? Why don't you find out what all your innovators have been doing while you've been paying them to sit at home? Because normally they'd be in the lab. So that was really productive. The other kind of innovation mining session really quickly is, when you need a product improvement, when you've got a mature product and it's just kind of stuck, we need to refresh. And so you might do a more focused innovation mining session about how do we do a product improvement for product X? And then you just focus on that. And you force people to come with ideas about a very specific kind of problem.
And I would hope you look at customer feedback and all those other channels.
All of that stuff. So you always you have to involve marketing, you have to involve sales, you have to involve R&D, because everybody has a vote or not necessarily a vote. Everybody has input onto how we prioritize these, because you're not going to prioritize something that you can't manufacture and you can't scale, no matter how good of an idea it is. So you need your logistics and your manufacturing people at the table. You're not going to prioritize something that marketing says doesn't fit our brand. There's no customer need. It's not fitting a niche. Your marketing has to have input at the table too. So really, this is a multidisciplinary approach. You don't just get innovators talking about themselves. You need everybody.
Sure. And it makes sense that you would want all disciplines at the table during the conversation. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What systems or rituals have you found most effective for surfacing and developing ideas from every corner of an organization? Is that indeed the mining opportunity that you were just talking about?
That's one, but because those are time consuming and you need a lot of people to have one opening on their schedule for an entire day, they're really hard to do without advanced planning. You can't do them a lot. So some of the simpler things to do. One is what I talked about, getting out of your office, because that takes 10 minutes a day.
Right.
Number two, it's a little bit more nuanced, but a lot of companies have invention incentive programs. So what these look like, especially companies that file a fair number of patents. So what this looks like is the innovators will submit an invention disclosure to a patent committee or somebody who's making a decision. Should we file a patent on this or not? And that's a very, very common way that companies operate. There are two reasons why an invention isn't, blessed to go forward for patenting. Okay. So one is it's just not a very good invention. Nobody thinks it's going to do anything. Nobody thinks it's worth anything. All right. So you get some of those. Right. And I should say the other part of this is very often there's incentive awards. So if the committee approves the filing, all of the inventors on the idea will get a couple of $100, right? Maybe there's $1,000 invention award. Maybe there's a $500 invention award. It's not breaking the bank.
I like it.
And then they might get a future award when the patent issues.
People need to be recognized.
This is a very common thing in big companies. A lot of big companies, even medium-sized companies, frankly, have this kind of program. So that's important to keep in mind, because one of the ways that a patent or an invention doesn't go forward to a patent is, one, it's just not any good. Okay. It's not any good. All right.
Right.
No feelings are hurt, come back again, try again. But the other reason why somebody says, I don't want to publish this. I don't want it, because if you patent it, it becomes public. That's why that's part of the bargain of a patent. That's why the patent system exists.
Interesting.
Because your patents become public, you teach the whole world how to do it. And if you do something sufficiently new and sufficiently interesting, the patent office will grant you a patent, which gives you a monopoly for a certain period of time over that patent. But that's in exchange for disclosing it, so the whole world can see it.
Sure.
And, if scientists don't keep their discoveries private, they publicize them so scientists can learn more and do more. Okay.
Interesting.
So you might decide, let's say it's a really interesting manufacturing method, or it's a new polymer or compound, and you don't want to disclose the ingredients, right? It's the formula for Coca-Cola.
Right.
You don't want to disclose that, right? 20 years of patenting isn't good enough, because your formula could be good for 100 years, okay?
Liquid gold.
Right. So you decide, I'm not going to file for a patent on this because we want to keep it a trade secret. If that decision has the same incentive as that invention is no good, we're not filing for a patent, that's a mistake. Because because somebody has brought you something that's valuable, that's going to contribute to the company that you've determined is valuable, but you've given it the same recognition as a bad invention, which is nothing. So what happens? Again, it's all about encouraging your innovators to innovate. When they come up with things that they think won't be patented, even no matter how valuable they are, if they think they're trade secrets, so compounds, manufacturing processes, all this kind of stuff, they just stop disclosing it. And it goes back to the comment that I made earlier, the example of the person who's in the manufacturing plant who doesn't tell anybody what their inventions are. You don't know where your innovation is now because people were disincentivized from disclosing really valuable innovations because you didn't reward them. So what do? There's a simple thing you can do. In addition to the patent awards, you give trade secret awards. So now if something's deemed a trade secret, and that's why you don't file for a patent, you give that person an award. And you don't have to give it right away. You can say the committee will come back next year, and if we're using this in the business and it's giving us an advantage, you get your trade secret award then. The advantages of that, there's numerous advantages to that. Number one, people disclose their innovations, so everybody wins. Number two, if you ask the right questions and you have your disclosure set up the right way, you will find out who knows your trade secrets and where they're kept and who's responsible for the security of them. You can ask those questions on the form that the person sends in. And now guess what? You know where your trade secrets are. I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with a company that's either being sold, they're getting an investment, and you have this massive, stock, asset purchase agreement or some big M&A deal. And it's a 100-page agreement. And it says, on Schedule A is a list of all of our intellectual property. And under trade secrets, it says none. And you go, this cannot possibly be the case. And it's not none because they have none. It's none because they don't know where they are. Now, that's a really bad thing for a couple of reasons.
It's terrible.
One, you're not going to get paid for what you don't disclose to the buyer, an asset that you have but you don't disclose. Number two, let's say now you sell the company, and now 50 of your top employees leave, and they go to your competitor. And you go, I'm going to sue them all for trade secret misappropriation. The problem is you just represented that you didn't have any. So good luck. So having a system where people disclose their trade secrets, and it costs you almost nothing. It costs you, the trade secret award and working with your IT folks to make sure that when people disclose those, you store that somewhere that's really, really, really secure. Right? That's super, super valuable. So that one step I would recommend for any company that has any kind of invention incentive program, include your trade secrets.
That is compelling. I'm thinking about the storage of those secrets, and I could see why they would want to have that in an on-premise situation.
So one of the things you ask in an invention disclosure form, you ask all the questions you need for patenting, right? But you might also ask, who else knows this? Where is it located? Sometimes it's located in a file cabinet in the plant manager's office, right? Which is fine. But then the next question is, who's responsible for the security? Because now you have names associated with the trade secret, so that when employees leave and you do your inevitable exit interview, and at your exit interview, you say, now remember, everything you learned here is confidential and you can't bring it with you. And that goes over their head because it's just facially untrue. Not everything they learned is confidential. But because you don't know what they know, you can't have a meaningful exit interview where you reinforce the actual things that you want to make sure they're aware are trade secrets. Because I think most times that trade secrets walk out the door of a company, there's no bad intent. There's employees who didn't realize that the things that they knew were really sensitive to the company because they deal with it every day.
Right.
And they haven't been trained, and so they don't realize. So when you do an exit interview, rather than say, hey, everything that you learned is confidential, you could say, hey, I know that you know item A, B, C, and D. Those are confidential. Those are our trade secrets. You have a much better chance that that person doesn't disclose those because now that's top of mind. And so the innocent, I just walked away and I didn't realize all this stuff was trade secret. That excuse goes away if you do your exit interviews effectively, and being able to track your trade secrets enables you to do that. And it all starts with making sure that people disclose your trade secrets. You give incentives for them so you can track them and know what they are.
I love the incentive because it starts all the positive behaviors. It starts with recognizing the person that comes forward with the trade secret. That's powerful.
You know what frustrated me? The response from management to this, to incentive programs overall. And most companies, I think, most big companies have them, like I said, and a lot of medium-sized companies have them. When they don't, it's because management says, why am I paying you extra for what already is your job? Now,
I don't like that.
Now put yourself in the position of the innovator, right?
Right. Like, I'm helping us make $1 billion on that
I am
brand.
helping us, but not only that, it's sort of just the lack of recognition of gratitude that I am not just a cog in this wheel, I'm not just, you plug me in, you stick me in my office, you bleed me dry and I go home. Right? And that's how you think of me when you say, why should I recognize you? This is already your job.
That leaves such a bad taste. That makes me mad actually. Just,
I don't want to make you mad. Okay.
Take care of your people. You've worked to move innovations from the drawing board to market rather than just to the courtroom. What has litigation taught you about what companies often miss in the journey from invention to commercial success?
Well, it's a couple of things. One, I used to get the pushback from my CEO every once in a while, which is, why do we have all of these patents? We never sue anybody. And my response to him was, because they're working.
Yes,
because a patent
and they're protecting you.
Because a patent is a right to exclude. It is much better that a competitor just avoid your technology because of your patents, rather they infringe it and make you spend gobs and gobs of money to go enforce it. If litigation's taught me anything, well, litigation's taught me a lot of things, but one of the things it's taught me is it's a really inefficient way to use your intellectual property. It's horrendously inefficient because you have to take the costs of litigating right off the top. And that's assuming that you even win, which is difficult and time consuming. In most cases, settle anyway.
Really?
So I wouldn't look at your IP as, there are some companies for whom you would, right? So let's just restrict ourselves first to operating companies, because I think that's probably who we're talking about, as opposed to companies that are just acquiring intellectual property for licensing purposes, because that's really a very different kind of thing, and it's a different kind of culture. And it's not really what we've been talking about. We're really talking about operating companies. You are not amassing your intellectual property to go off and enforce it. It's not efficient. What you're amassing your intellectual property to do is, one, to keep your competitors at bay, at least the responsible ones, who are monitoring what you're doing and are clearing their own products, making sure they're doing searches and that they can launch their products, which is important for every company to do. It's not only about your own intellectual property, but avoiding other people's. It's really important.
Sure.
But two, you hope that if you do spot somebody using it, you send them a letter that they say, okay, we'll change it. Right.
Or I will stop doing that.
I will stop doing it. I will change it. Right. You just don't want to spend $2 to $3 to $4 million for the next 3 years litigating it, maybe more, depending on what you're talking about. What your patents also help you do is, if your competitors, God forbid, come to you and say, hey, you're doing something that I don't like. But you look at what they're doing and you look at your patents and go, well, turnabout is fair play. I have my own patents, and maybe we ought to settle this rather than mutually assured destruction and go sue each other. So it's a defensive portfolio for many companies. But I would say, so I'll come back to some very specific, but probably not ways that you thought, ways that I'll answer that particular question about what did litigation teach you about what failed. Very often you learn in litigation what your company or a company should have done differently as you're figuring out how to defend yourself or litigate a particular technology. So let's say you've got a really valuable trade dress. So, your product packaging is iconic. Okay. And you can pick any kind of iconic product packaging. And so now let's assume that you're an operating company, and you are either not enforcing that trade dress against other people. So there are other folks that are doing similar things, and you're not bothering to enforce your trademarks. Or let's say you're a really big company and you're making private label products for people, okay? Because Kroger, or any of the big manufacturers, Target, Walmart, they don't have a bunch of manufacturing plants making a bunch of stuff. Their customers make the shampoo, the garbage bags, the paper plates, all the consumer goods, the T-shirts, the clothing that they all have under a private label brand, right?
Right.
And so, very often now Walmart's not a problem because they have their own great value brand.
Of course.
But there are other retailers. Aldi has been sued by this recently by Mondelez for having their cookies that are in the same package, arguably, and trade dress as Mondelez's cookies. So their, chocolate chip cookies look a lot on the shelf like Chips Ahoy. And
that's not good.
And their Oreo cookies, knockoffs, the package looks like an Oreo cookie package. Okay, so Aldi likes to toe the line with their private label goods. A lot of smaller retailers, the dollar stores, frequently toe the line with making their packages look like the private label goods. Now, if you are the big company with the big brand and you are making those private label packaged goods, because there's a lot of money in private label. You make everything that goes in the box, you just don't make the box. So you can get paid really good money on private label. But if you let your customers use packaging that's too close to your own, and you will find this out when you go to litigate your trademark against somebody, and it turns out you don't really care about that trademark. Look, you let people use it for nothing. And now that trademark doesn't have as much value as you thought it did. And that diminishes the distinctiveness of your brand. And your trademarks are all about how distinctive they are. They have to be distinctive. It's one of the legal requirements of a trademark. It has to be distinctive. And if you dilute that yourself, good luck going to enforce your iconic trade dress against a competitor. They'll say, why can't I do it? You let Dollar General do it. You let Aldi do it. You let, pick a company do it. So I could do it. That's a really hard thing to defend against. So
that's a really good point, and that would make me think twice about white labeling.
Yes, and one of the things that I did when I was in-house for a big company that did private labels, we had private label guidelines. So the private label guidelines said if we're gonna, with our supply agreement, there's an exhibit which tells you here are the things you can and can't do on your package, and this was the requirement. So if our package were, red and yellow, and we would tell you like the entire list of Pantone reds you had to avoid, and where you couldn't put red on the package if there was also yellow, right? So you have to be mindful of those things, because those are the things that you will learn when you go to litigate and find out you don't have the rights that you thought you did.
It definitely makes me pause. And I have a cat that joined me.
It should make you pause, and it should make CPG companies pause about private label and make sure they're doing it the right way. And it's a really difficult discussion because you are across the table telling your customer what they can't do, right? You don't have a lot of leverage sometimes. So this is where you can't let your lack of leverage lead to your IP walking out the door, because it all circles back to the first point we made. But when you do that, your innovators stop wanting to innovate.
Exactly. So Daniel, what personal skill or outside passion has most influenced your ability to lead innovation and navigate change? And how can CEOs cultivate similar growth outside their core business expertise?
So I have a bunch of answers to that question. Look, if you can't learn anything unless you're first humble, because you have to admit you don't know something. If you think you know everything, you're not going to learn anything. When I was a very, very young lawyer, and I literally thought I knew everything, which was clearly not true. I'd only been a lawyer for like 2 years. And I was in a room with a very, very experienced lawyer who I didn't know all that well, but I came off as incredibly arrogant. And he said something to me that I never forgot, which was, I wish I was as sure about anything as you are about everything.
Wow.
and so that was, that was a big moment, right? Because I realized you have to be humble to lead. Even later than that, I mean, my first son wasn't even born when that happened. He was born about a year later. Nothing humbles you like your kids. and there's a Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman used to say, you don't really know anything unless you can teach it.
I would agree with that.
And so being a adjunct law school professor of legal writing and dealing with law students for the last decade has helped me be a better writer. And it's helped me spot how people who haven't been doing it as long as I have, who don't have kind of all the baggage, good and bad, that I carry with me from experience, how they actually think about these problems. Because I do have to be able to communicate to juries for sure when I'm litigating, and judges, but also to my clients in a way that doesn't talk to them with legalese. I need to be able to explain to them what I'm suggesting and what it really means and what the real advantages are and what the strategy is. I had to do that when I was in-house, when I was dealing with, my client every day, and of all different capabilities, of all different intellectual capabilities, of people of all different creative capabilities, with all different responsibilities. And you had to talk to all of them differently.
Sure.
And I would tell executives, listen and be humble. And when your lawyers tell you, no, we can do this and succeed, listen to them, right? I mean,
that's a good thing to hear.
It's, I would have, look, we would do things where we were developing, pick something. It could be a French fry container for McDonald's. It could be a coffee cup for Starbucks. It could be, a bottle for Clorox. Okay. And they wanted some kind of exclusive rights to some technology that we were really good in and figuring out how to do. And they would say they want to own that technology that went into that product. And they wanted to own all of the improvements in that technology, which is a killer. If you're in, say, the bottle making business and you're making bottles for Coca-Cola and they say, we want to own all of the improvements, well, then you're out of the bottle making business, because everything you do is an improvement on everything else that you do. Right?
Right.
And if your CEO says, I am not saying no to Coca-Cola or to Starbucks or to Procter & Gamble or to McDonald's or to Walmart or to pick the big company that you just want to sell to because there's 9 figures of EBITDA if you sell to them. And they want something. They want your improvements. They want your intellectual property. And your lawyer tells you, you cannot say yes to that because you'll be out of business in 5 years. You'll have no more innovation. Your customers will own all of it.
That's very good
and they
advice.
Say, I cannot say no to this company. Your lawyer says, yes, you can. They want your stuff badly enough that they'll take it, and they don't actually know what they're asking for and don't need it. Trust me, let's get this resolved. Those are hard conversations to have with the CEO. But if you don't have a CEO who, trusts the lawyers and understands intrinsically that there's truth in when I say you can't give this away, it is more valuable to own your innovation than to have, a short-term revenue bump, that you can get both. And if you have, a really arrogant management, they'll drive their company into disaster, right? I was fortunate not to have work with those kinds of people, but it didn't mean I didn't have hard conversations and try to explain it to them.
Right.
But I think that now that I'm a lawyer and I see these agreements, it makes me shudder. And I just wonder, nobody had that conversation when they should have.
It's a tightrope. It's hard because you want to keep business moving forward and you want them to make the most informed decisions that they possibly can.
Yeah.
Clearly. Is there anything else that you would like to share today?
Yes. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. I really appreciated it. Look, if there's any of your listeners that heard anything I said and said, I would like to learn more, or they had the turned white as a sheet because they recognized they're doing something wrong, I would say contact me.
Excellent. How can listeners find you?
I would say Google Daniel Shulman, but it's a pretty common name and there's a lot of us, so you might not find me. Daniel Shulman at Vedder Price, Vedder Price. Phone number is 312-609-7530. Those are the easiest ways you can find me on LinkedIn. Now, that would be the best way.
Excellent. And you're in Chicago, correct?
I'm in Chicago. My clients are all over, but I'm in Chicago.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It was delightful.
The 3 takeaways from our conversation today: empower your innovators beyond the buzz. Innovation won't thrive unless the people closest to the work, your day-to-day teams, are recognized, empowered, and incentivized. Intellectual property is more than defense. Most CEOs see IP as a shield, but it should be used as a lever for growth. Understand the unique ways your organization creates value, then make sure those innovations are protected and exclusive to you. Make innovation a team sport. Breakthrough ideas come from everywhere. That means cross-disciplinary collaboration, regular innovation mining sessions, and incentive programs that reward not just patents, but trade secrets and process improvements. Whether you're scaling a startup or leading a global enterprise, these practical steps can unlock more value from your team's creativity and safeguard your company's future. Thanks so much for listening, and subscribe and never miss an episode.